Hello Claire, thank you for joining me for our Women Who Make It Happen series.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Would you be able to give an introduction to yourself and brief overview of your career?
Sure, yes. So my name's Claire Barratt. I work for BCB Group and my role there is Head of Banking and Strategic Partnerships. So at BCB Group, we're providing banking rails for the digital asset industry as well as trading.
Sounds very exciting.
It is, yeah, it's a good company.
And how does that compare to earlier careers? So can you talk us through the earlier career days for you as well and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, yes. So I started in the traditional banking space. I really fell into banking, actually. I was at an army open evening and it was just after the sort of terrorist attacks in London, and they had someone that pulled out of an internship, and so they had availability. And I put my hand up, went for an interview, and the next week I delayed my final year of university and started with an internship in banking. So I really fell into it. It's very true. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So I happened to be in the right room at the right time. I then completed that internship year, returned to university for my final year of my degree, and then went on to the graduate programme at Commerzbank, where I was. I then moved on to Wells Fargo Bank, where I spent 10 years of my career. Fantastic organisation based in London, so we were quite a small team, but as the international team grew that out. And I could have stayed there forever. There was a fantastic team, fantastic people, but I wanted to stretch myself, and I got approached by Revolut. So that was my first jump into the fintech space. Yep. Was there for just over a year, leading their banking and partnerships team. And then my last role was at a company called Orbital, where I was there for just under 4 years. Started as head of banking and partnerships and moved into the chief operating officer role, was my final role there. So a real mixture in my background of traditional banking, really focusing on correspondent banking and payments space, and now leading me into the fintech world, which I think is it's a good background to have that blend, and I've really enjoyed my career.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting how you've navigated that TradFi into fintech. So what would you say has been the biggest difference or step change for you having done that?
I think the speed at which fintechs operate. And the real belief in getting things done where there's challenges, that's certainly what I've seen and what I enjoy about the fintech space. It does feel a bit like dog years sometimes, where it's very intense, but you really get things done. And if you really want to have impact for our clients and to make things happen, it feels like in fintech you can really move. That's not to say it's not wrong in the banking space. There's just typically a lot more processes, procedures, and therefore things just take time. So I do think some sort of hybrid between the two is the perfect balance, where you don't want to be operating wildly, but having some sense of speed where you can really respond to clients' needs is, I think, is where fintech's winning in the space.
And I suppose with the evolving regulations as well from the industry, but the TradFi to fintech, you're going to have to adhere to those. So I guess you can't run wildly with some elements, can you? And I appreciate in your line of work, you'll see more of a holistic overview of that. Yes,
yeah, absolutely. And I think in different jurisdictions, so I've done a lot of work, regulatory work in the UK and Gibraltar specifically, around, in the crypto industry. And we are seeing that space becoming more, more toughly regulated, if you like, with MiCA in Europe. And that's good because it levels the playing field. We want to play with partners and customers that are doing the right thing. We want to be doing the right thing. And so, we're just trying to operate well and bring innovative products to our customers squarely in the space of compliance and regulation.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say the key success factors have been for you, maybe in particular, having navigated that TradFi to fintech change and now more crypto?
I think for my career, it's been, I've always been open to opportunities. So when I was very early in my career, I think it was when I was a graduate, it was when I was at Wells Fargo Bank, we had these lunch and learn sessions. And I remember this female leader, and she said that she had taken opportunities to take side steps in her career, and not always thinking of that upward trajectory with promotions, to get a broad understanding of different parts of the business to then make her a more well-rounded leader in the end. And it really stuck with me somehow. And so I've really followed that opportunity. So I started in relationship management and sales. then there was a consent order where effectively the sales team had to become compliance officers overnight. I actually found the financial crime space really fascinating. So I changed tack, and then I spent 4 years in that space. So I really got to understand our banking customers in a completely different light rather than sales, but understanding their processes, how they were doing compliance, what transactions they were looking at. Then my boss moved roles and gave me an opportunity to work in network management, which is really how I've ended up in this banking and partnership space. And that was also fascinating from a completely different angle. And I think that's where I really enjoyed my position most recently as Chief Operating Officer. It allowed me to have a good understanding of different divisions.
Yeah.
Not enough, you still need your expertise and your specialists in those areas, but when you're trying to lead in those areas, you need to know enough to be able to make decisions and guide the team. And that's how I've worked my career, and it's been, I think it's been really useful.
Yeah, it sounds really, really interesting. You've certainly been involved in quite a few different areas.
Yes.
Do you think that's helped to shape you as to how you approach things now?
I think so. I think part of it's a bit of just time in industry. It's been almost 20 years now, so there's a little bit of time where you get to experience different things. I think that shapes you as well. But yeah, I think different organisations. I think also you learn a lot from different places.
Yeah.
So you don't want to move too often in your career, I think, but at certain periods it's good to reflect on, am I still growing as an individual? Could I stretch myself in another direction?
Yeah.
For me this time I wanted to move more squarely into the crypto industry, understanding those crypto clients a lot more, and making that decision for my career that I want to carry on down this digital asset path, if you like.
Yeah.
Because it's a fascinating space, and although you can feel quite late to the party, it's still very early in the game, in my opinion. So I think there's still opportunities to get involved in the space if people have interest.
What is it about the crypto space that interests you so much more?
I don't know. It's just I just find it fascinating, and there's a whole world of crypto that even I'm not in the detail of. We're very much more on the cross-border element of really how you can replace the banking system with digital assets is a really fascinating piece. There's a lot in the press around stablecoins at the moment and how you can leverage that part. So for me, coming from that traditional banking background where we were looking at SWIFT transactions and transactions taking days and various deductions, at various points in the chain, it's evolutionizing the system. There's still so much more to do, but I just like that it's an ever-changing space, and it's nice. For me, I like to continue developing myself and growing along the way.
Yeah, I think you said exactly what I would have said, like evolutionary. So what's next for you?
For me, I don't know. I'm really enjoying, I'm very early days into BCB, so really enjoying this company. I think when I was, looking for my next opportunity, I'd actually worked I was a client of BCB, and so I'd looked from the outside in, and I'd always wanted to join the team. So for me, BCB stood out as a company that would really expand in the market. They have a real opportunity to win, so I'm just delighted to be part of that journey. So we're looking at expanding into other jurisdictions and that sort of growth. I think the US is quite an interesting space around how that's going to pay out with the crypto industry.
Very interesting.
Yes, very topical. But I was at a conference last week in Hong Kong. We were at Consensus, and there's definitely a sort of excitement that there hopefully should be some regulatory clarity in the space, which allows people to play in the US, as I said, under regulatory and compliance, as we should, but there hasn't been that clarity before. So excited for what the industry can bring.
It sounds very exciting, and let's watch this space about the regulatory changes.
Yes.
So, you did touch upon a topic. If I could just go back to the leadership element. And clearly you're COO, you've been COO, leading banking and partnerships. So how have you really kind of dealt with that increased level of responsibility or the management style as well for you? What would you say that is?
So I think, stepping into that leadership role can be quite a change. I think the biggest change I found in my role as COO was very much going from a team of a couple of people to leading like an operations team. For my case, it was in an operations team in India, in the UK, and Gibraltar. It was sort of quite well spread. To leading a team of 40, actually that takes quite a lot of management time. And so that sort of slight adjustment. I think my natural instinct as an employee is to be hands-on. And so sometimes the challenge is actually to be a leader is to actually step back and, lead more than do. And that can be, I find that quite challenging in the fintech space because you're always running at a million miles an hour and we're always trying to get lots of things done. So I think that's something to try and be more strategic and make sure you have the headspace and time as an individual to make sure you're still stepping back and looking at the strategic goals of the company and are each department sort of stepping towards that line. So I think that's the biggest shift. In my current role, I have a very small team, so now I'm back to sort of being more in the day-to-day. But yeah, it's been a good journey.
Yeah, very good. And how do you think the people in your team respond to that hands-on approach that you've referenced? It is more evident in the fintech, certainly crypto space at the moment. So how do they and you deal with that dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's just about dividing and conquering and not doubling up. So certainly that's the case we've had in the new role. I think at first it's great, we've got another pair of hands on the job, but then it's how you're making the most effective use of your time to divide and conquer the tasks and make sure trying to keep eyes on the goal. That's certainly what my most recent years have taught me is you can sometimes get really caught up in just busy work and sometimes trying to do too much too soon, but actually being really strategic as a company. What are the company goals? What's the direction we're going to? Great. What's my department's goals and how am I going to help us as a company achieve those? And how do I interact with the other departments so that we're collectively achieving those? So, done a lot of work there around that sort of cross-department alignment, because that's really important. Because if you've got a goal and I've got a goal, but they're conjoined, we're not talking, it doesn't work. So that's how we've been working it.
Okay, really interesting. So Claire, you mentioned about having male bosses that have helped you through your career as well.
Yes.
From my point of view, it would be good to understand like what mentors or further coaches you may have had that helped you excel and really help you to where you are today.
So I haven't actually had a huge amount of mentors in my career. I wish I had actually, but I didn't. But there's a few resources that I used that were useful to me. So Money 2020 is a big conference in the fintech space, and they have a program called Rise Up, and that was for women in industry. It's now sort of gone on to sort of a broader program, but it still exists today. That was absolutely fantastic. That was my first experience, and I think the Rise Up community that exists. So every year there's another cohort that get added, and that support for each other is fantastic. So that really took sort of touched on topics that affect women, but all genders in the fintech space, and really allowed us some coaching. So it was more like in a group environment, and then I went on to mentor a couple of others in the following years. So that was really, really good resource for me. I did have a coach in the last couple of years, and I found it really valuable actually for someone that can talk you through areas of improvement and being open to sort of that feedback, and someone to bounce ideas off outside of your organisation. I found it quite transformative, but it's sort of really letting someone into your psyche of how you're thinking, and how they can really, really support you. So I think they are really valuable. I think it's just finding the one that you make the right connection with. I think that's important, and I think that's sometimes hard when you're sort of shopping for one online. You've got to, if it's someone that you meet that inspires you, I think that's a really nice way to say, I would, would you be open to mentoring me? I think that's a nice way to do it if you find someone that you have that connection with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's really good to hear that you've kind of given back as well through the next cohort in the Rise Up programme. So I do think people around you really can help to shape careers. Absolutely. And as you said, just that way of looking at things slightly differently.
No, that's good.
Well, it clearly has done a great job to help you to where you are today, Claire. And I just want to pick up a little bit on another point that you made earlier as well. So when you've navigated those changes through TradFi into Fintech and now crypto. What differences have you seen in maybe the adoption of more diverse thinking, or from Claire, you're a very senior female in your line of work and in BCB at the moment. But how have you seen that shift in the industry throughout your career?
So I think I've noticed it more in the fintech industry. In the 3 fintechs I've been in, the diversity of culture particularly has been so much more than I ever saw in banking. Possibly because in the banking space we tended to have regional offices, and therefore people would work locally in their local office. And yes, you would have some different people working in London, for example. But in fintechs, I don't know, where there's smaller office locations, it just feels like it's lots of cultures, lots of countries, lots of backgrounds. And I've just found it really fascinating when you're sitting around a boardroom table having discussions, just that diversity of thought. I found it, quite fascinating. I think in terms of the sort of female diversity piece, BCB particularly, I've had to stop sometimes and just look, and it's an all-female room.
I was going to say they've done very well.
It's quite astounding, actually, and it's fantastic, And so I've been in multiple meetings where we've discussed things, and I've just caught myself at the end thinking, gosh, I don't think this has ever happened before. So, it's typically been a male-dominated industry. I've always felt very supported personally in my career, and I've had, many male bosses who have been super allies and helped me with my career. So I haven't ever had personally a challenge with it, but it's really nice to see that shift in the industry. We've been talking at my previous company as well, a lot of work around how we can bring more females into technology and those areas. And I think looking at hackathons and all these sorts of, going into universities. And I think giving people the vision of, yes, this is a career opportunity for you. I think when you see people that are doing it, and we have some outstanding females in BCB, and I've seen across the industry, giving them the spotlight, if you like, so that people can look up to them and think, oh, maybe I could do that. How did you get there? And people want to know the path, because like me, I fell into banking, so sometimes it's not always a chosen path. And just giving people that visibility. I personally do a lot of work with my secondary school and go back to them and on careers evenings, and you see lots of bright-eyed 16 to 18-year-olds walking around with their parents trying to decide what they're going to do for their future. And my message is always, at this stage, do what you enjoy. I think I understood when I was at school going to university, it was very clear. It was you were an engineer, you were a doctor, you were those sorts of roles.
Scripted, very defined, about the career or not.
That's it. And I went into a business degree and didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do. And I remember on my first day at my internship, there was a graduate, and he'd done civil engineering, and I thought, well, why are you in a banking job? And I just didn't understand, because I'd never been exposed to that. So my advice to them is always do what you want to do. If you enjoy history, geography, languages, whatever that may be, if you want to do that through university, it doesn't have to be. Certain jobs you need certain degrees to get through, but actually in the banking space you could do any degree, and I think you're more likely to do well if it's something you enjoy. Do what you enjoy, and then sort of pick up your career from there. That's my advice.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then you can pivot from that, can't you?
Absolutely.
Either further studying or qualifications on the job.
That's it.
But we do part of that as group. Our group go into very much visibility of the STEM subjects in schools and universities, and it's that promotion from the early days, isn't it? It's part and parcel of why we do this series. And as you said, somebody like yourself, others can see that there's an aspiration there as to how you got to where you are and taking those chances. So it seems quite maybe a good moment then to ask what key words of advice or words of wisdom you might give to younger females. Or younger talent generally?
Yeah, so I think that school university age, I would say do what you enjoy. Enjoy those early days and do that subject and worry about the sort of big career steps later. I would say to sort of younger people in the industry, I would say don't be afraid of sideways steps. Sometimes actually gaining that knowledge now, and there's always a thirst for promotion and pay rises and all those sorts of things. Actually, sometimes that comes later. Yep. So to give yourself that breadth of experience, that's the nugget of information I took when I was younger, and I've only enjoyed my journey. I've got to meet some wonderful people, work for some wonderful people, learn a broad range of experiences, and I think I've been very happy with that, with how it's worked out for me.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very strong message to send. So thank you, Claire, for joining.
No, thank you.
And thank you for your words of wisdom.
No problem. Thank you.